So now I will invite Kim Gurney, artist, writer and researcher to come up here, together with Catharina Gabrielsson, architect, researcher and writer, and is associate professor and docent in architecture and urban theory at KTH. And Kim will give us your opening lecture, but I've asked Catharina Gabrielsson to introduce you more in depth and also to lead the Q&A with you after. But the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Annika. I'm just going to say a few words to introduce Kim, who I'm very happy and thrilled to meet again here in Stockholm. Last time we had a sort of session together was actually in July in Greece. We were both taking part in the writing workshop. That was extremely exciting. So I've been following Kim's work for quite some time, since 2013 in fact, and I'm a huge admirer. So Kim Gurney is based in Cape Town, South Africa, and works in an interdisciplinary way across writing, art practice and academic research. Her research interests include contemporary art, urbanism and public sphere and media studies. With a background in journalism, Kim takes a special interest in current affairs and how the past inflects the present, most pointedly in work relating to South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Kim's art practice relates to disappearances of different sorts and makes restorative gestures. She's also very much engaged in other practitioners through nomadic curatorial platforms. And she is also very widely published. Her two recent books, which I have copies of, I'm happy to send them around, are linked to Johannesburg. It's The Art of Public Space, Reimagining and Curating the Ephemeral City. And the more recent one, which is from last year, I think. This is 2015. And then only last year this came out, August House is Dead. Long Live August House, which is, Kim describes as a book of creative non-fiction about the changing fortunes of an inner-city building that explores how contemporary art matters by following artwork journeys from the studio to the collection. Kim currently holds an Andrew W. Mellon Foundation Next Generation Researcher Fellowship at the Centre for Humanities Research at the University of the Western Cape, and she's affiliated as a research associate in the African Centre for Cities at the University of Cape Town, and at the African Centre for Cities is a place that I know a little bit since I was a visiting scholar there a couple of years ago, which is also where I met Kim. So thanks for coming here, Kim, and we look forward to your talk, and afterwards I would be in charge of questions and answers. Thank you.
First of all, a really big thank you to all the collaborating host institutions of this event for the generosity of inviting me here today, in particular the Public Art Agency Sweden, Elena and Annika for the logistics in getting me here, to enable me to join you in your deliberations on researching public art. It's a particularly interesting time to consider the broader conference topic of publicness in general, Sweden's elections in the rearview mirror, and also just more generally the sort of deeper tectonic shifts in the public sphere globally. I'm not sure if we can say that's interesting, maybe challenging. There are also people in this audience whose work I really admire and whose shared predilection for working in off spaces, as it were, conceptually and sometimes very literally, has given me a sense of affinity and kinship that makes interdisciplinary awkwardness feel a little bit less acute. So it's really great to be here in this room today. My talk engages performativity of urban everyday realities as a way to reconsider art in public space. So what I mean by that will become a bit more apparent as we move through the talk. The pink elephant will also become a bit more apparent as we go, the meaning of that. But just to clarify, it doesn't have anything to do with cannabis being made legal in Cape Town recently. It's more to do with the mind-bending capacity of the imagination to kind of keep two apparently contradictory things in mind at once. And also perhaps the affective power of the performative to shift spatial awareness and to induce sort of other kinds of reckoning in its wake. There are just two things that I'll really be playing with through this talk, so it might seem that there's quite a lot of information, but it's really all just playing with two key ideas. The one is a kind of tension between disappearance and appearance, so kind of visibility and invisibility, and not really the binaries of that, it's more like a kind of a spectrum. So you'll see as we go what I mean by that. The elephant illustrates that quite well. And the other idea is just different notions of common space. So common space as space that kind of belongs to everybody and nobody at the same time. The talk is structured in three parts. So I'll begin where I now live and work, which is in Cape Town in South Africa, on the southern tip of the continent of Africa, just to set some context about the nature of public space in the part of the world where I'm coming from. I'll spend a bit of time there because obviously there's different assumptions and premises about public space in the kind of city of the global south, as we seem to be called. And that informs the kind of observations that can be made. There's some, as a way in, I'm going to tell you about an emblematic case of a colonial era artwork that disappeared from public space about 3 years ago, carted away on the back of a flatbed truck. I know it's a story that many of you probably feel that you're familiar with in its broader details, but I'm not going to tell you that story, the story of the Cecil John Rhodes statue being carted away. I'm going to tell you the story about the empty plinth. It wasn't really so empty after all, because since that statue got carted away, there's been a whole host of performative interventions on that plinth that I've been following and tracking and documenting quite faithfully. And I want to show you the evidence or the documentation of that and tell you a bit about the significance of those quite spontaneous artworks, really as a way of showing you the ongoing transformative effect on the country's public sphere that these works and that event has had by challenging notions of common space. We're then going to head 1,400 kilometers north to Johannesburg to pay a visit to a Johannesburg inner city building where some artists lived and worked until that former factory was put up for sale. We'll stop there just long enough to introduce you to that pink elephant in the building's nearby surrounds and its mystifying antics. It's an elephant that features in a very pink book of creative non-fiction that Catharina mentioned, and it really tells a bigger story about that atelier and why it mattered. It tells that story by following the journey of various artworks made in the building's midst at a time of great flux. It's really a story about uncertainty and how artists dealt with that and how they're ultimately their own agents of renewal. More deeply, it's about artistic thinking and how that gets carried forward by the artworks themselves and sort of projected into the world as kind of vectors of value, which is another kind of performative chain. So we move from context to specificity through examples of artworks. And then finally, part 3, we stick with independent art spaces, but just get a bit more broad and visit 2 other examples of art spaces in other African cities. So, part 1, I just want you to see the shape of the statue that got carted away, because it becomes a bit more relevant in a minute when I show you one of the performative artworks. Excuse the quality of the image, I stole it off the internet. I just want you to see where it all began. This is the student Chumani Makwele, who in April 2015 made a performative intervention on the base of the statue of Rhodes. He's dressed there in very performative gear, as you can see, a pink construction worker's helmet, he's blowing a whistle, a protest whistle. He's got some placards on his chest that is protest in white arrogance, and what he's holding in his hand is a toilet canister from a chemical toilet, and he's flinging human feces taken from a township nearby onto the base of the statue. He's doing it on the first day of a performance public performance festival in Cape Town called Infecting the City. And when security guards arrived, he told them he's doing a performance piece, and they let him carry on, and it lasted all day. He said he told people who were asking him what he's doing, he's protesting the arrogance of the institution and the nervous condition that black students suffer at the institution, and the claustrophobia they feel from these kinds of monuments and so on, and he's sort of making that visible. I'll speak a bit more about that because it's actually he's making other kinds of things visible at the same time. The significance of what he's doing is that flinging shit at a statue has a much deeper political significance, and I just want to spend a minute on that. He did it at a time when the whole politics in Cape Town was basically coordinated around sanitation issues. It's in a city where there's a kind of an infrastructural violence, if you like, because a lot of people are forced to use informal sanitation solutions, and this act of flinging feces, as horrendous as it may sound, had been used previously at public sites like the airport, provincial legislature, a financial company headquarters, and so on. So it had precedence before his performative act, and it linked to social justice activists who basically said that they're bringing the periphery to the center, and they're making visible this infrastructural violence. And another point to sort of link to that act is that although it may be understood that South Africa remains a very unequal country, we've got one of the highest Gini coefficients in the world, what's often not understood is how that is spatially replicated today in the present tense. That's linked to urbanization. There's a lot of sort of building going on, but it's going on the periphery because that's where the land values are cheapest. So these housing developments and so on carry on being done on the outskirts, and it exacerbates race and class exclusions. So he's kind of, this act really caught fire in a way because it connected to deeper structural and infrastructural issues. So that's why this Roads Must Fall movement, which you'll see visibly demonstrated in a minute, became Fees Must Fall, which was about financial exclusion. It became Bread Prices Must Fall because it was about broader exclusion in society. It lit up at other universities around the country, and it lit up at other institutions, and arguably had global resonance to other societies who were battling, what do we do with the past and the present? How do we build and reimagine a different public sphere when there are stark inequalities? So these are the interventions that took place. This is how it began. Looks like a Crisco wrapping, doesn't it, with black garbage bags and packaging tape. Excuse me, and that's the evidence of the toilet canister on the plinth. This is a poem by David Diop at the base of the plinth, Time of the Martyr. I'll move quite quickly through these images because there are a few of them. The students would gather daily at the foot of the statue and have quite sophisticated political debates about what should be done about the statue and why it was offensive to them and how they felt it represented much larger issues. It wasn't just about a statue, it was about much larger issues in society. And as you can see, that signage on the back, Roads Must Fall, became a Twitter meme, and then it became an actual social movement. The statue got crated up before it got hoisted and taken away a month later into an undisclosed location where it remains. Its fate had to be publicly decided because the university is on a public heritage site, so the public has to also be involved in its final fate, and the deliberations are ongoing. This is what the plinth looks like today. That stone base is covered with a permanent wooden crate, and it's basically a constantly morphing notice board and canvas for graffiti and interventions of all sorts of different kinds. It's almost like that fourth plinth in London that's open for different kinds of enactments that constantly shift, and the university allows that to happen. This is one example of such an enactment. That's quite a recognizable signage now that denotes the Americana massacre as it's come to be known, because of the green blanket and the white cross which is a protest that miners staged in 2012 at Rustenburg in South Africa for higher wages, and 34 of them died during that, or were killed more accurately, during that protest. And the green blanket was a blanket that one of the protesters was wearing, and became kind of an iconic image during that protest. This is a graffiti image of the disappeared Rhodes statue that a graffiti artist drew cascading down the steps. It remains there to this day. You can see the fist under the chin, mimicking the original pose of the statue. Just another intervention on the plinth. This is a close-up of a kind of more formal graffiti board that somebody set up anonymously. And that's the same board. The local scouts troop thought that we needed a language to understand one another, and so they put Morse code up on the board, which I thought was quite a nice intervention. There was a chair put up at one point, and the warning, sit at your own risk, and people would go up there, clamber up there, and mimic different poses on the chair. This is a board alongside where the statue used to be, and it used to list all the cultural heritage sites at the university, and it got scrubbed clean because obviously it was just one particular version of what those cultural heritage sites were about. There were a lot of riots during this time for about a year and a half that would flare up at different intervals. This is an aftermath of a burning that took place. There were three key demands: a demand for no fees, because students had to pay for education in South Africa. As of February this year, fees are now free for students who cannot afford to pay, and to decolonize the curriculum, and to contract in workers that were contracted out. Those were the three key demands. This is an architecture school hosting a kind of a self-critique. This is a shack that was built on the plaza at one point by the students to protest accommodation issues and access issues to accommodation. It got mowed down by an armoured vehicle and rebuilt, and it became a potent symbol. It's known to this day as Shackville because it became quite a violent confrontation, and various students were brought to court around some of those issues. And the reason it became really important is that a whole institutional reconciliation process is linked to this issue called Shackville, and it uses principles linked to our Truth Commission, for instance, amnesty procedures and restorative justice procedures that are ongoing at the university. So it really challenged the university to think differently about conflict and resolution procedures, and those are ongoing. All the artworks at the university are being reassessed. This one got covered up and became a notice board of debate. It then got taken down, and in its place is a kind of celebratory message about fees having fallen. And through this image, just to mention that other statues around the country also got interfered with during this time. This is another Rhodes statue that had its nose sliced off in reference to Nicole Goggles' play, an absurdist play, where the main protagonist's nose develops a life of its own, and underneath there that graffiti says the master's nose betrays him. And this is a graffiti alongside your dreams of empire will die. That was an anonymous intervention there. So that's the spontaneous interventions. Before I end this first part, just three that were more deliberate kind of artworks that relate to the plinth. This is and they relate to the Fine Arts School at UCT. This is Tembile Msizani. She's a master's student at UCT at the time. On the day that the statue was lifted off its plinth, she dressed in kind of these wing-like appendages that make reference to a statue of a bird that was wrongfully appropriated by Rhodes during his time, and today still exists on his estate in Cape Town. And she built her own plinth, and she stood upon the plinth. You can see she's a bit elevated, and the way that this image is taken, it appears as if she is kind of hoisting him off his plinth. It's called Chapungu, the day Rhodes fell. This is another group also related to Michaelis. It's actually a group of 23 people. Some are students, some are youth offenders from a prison program, some are practitioners. It's a complete mix of people related to one master student at Michaelis, her body of work. They collaborated on this video installation. This is part of the enactment. They played with two sites. The first is the empty plinth, playing with the concept of toppling. The second site was also a site of elevation, but in a township called Kailicha. This is the lookout site, so that they could play with the second concept of looking things over. This is a video, the resulting video installation. So they were interested in the sort of racialized discourse that came out of this, and xenophobia, the sort of recurrence of xenophobia and what should be done about that, and obviously the whole decolonial conversations. This is the mask making workshop that led into the characters that played a part in the video. And here they are, a gangster and a military sergeant. I also wanted to draw attention to that work because it's a collective, and collective practice is really quite common or gaining in precedence in a lot of the other examples you'll see too. And finally, there was a 2-month occupation at the art school, a shutdown called Umhlangano in October 2016, in response to the government telling universities that they could unilaterally increase fees. This is before fees finally fell. So some art students decided that this was no good, and they instigated a shutdown of the art school. It was led mostly by women and LGBTQ students who used their body and subversive play as the main kind of instruments of protest. It was quite playful, and also the materiality, they turned the campus into a live art installation, and the materiality was very sort of everyday materials. Umhlangano means the gathering. And for 2 months there were no classes, there were just discussions about what kind of principles could possibly govern an art school and how that could infuse the university at large, and it was really interesting. It was quite low-key intervention, but very profound. I'll just show you a few images. Naming was really important. They renamed the buildings, which obviously have very, colonialist kind of names, gave them different names. Land, where's the land, was an ongoing issue. Concerns about moving forward. You can see the sort of protest architecture of this is inside the gallery. Students were sleeping inside the gallery. They were living and working on the campus. Max Price is the Vice Chancellor at the time, so there was humour and playfulness in the interventions. These are the kind of principles that were governing the space. The structures were very light and playful. They were regarded by court interdict as illegal, and many of them were carried off by security guards. This is again inside the gallery. It was all very improvisational, and this is the abiding image that I felt kind of encapsulated what the students were trying to get across. So that's really just, I guess, what I'm trying to set up some context with that example, and also just the point that not everyone's equally enabled in public spaces. Ashamin points out people are differentially enabled in some spaces, especially in cities of the south. So it's just important to keep that in mind before we kind of look at more specific examples of art. Okay, moving on then. Right around the same time that roads disappeared off his plinth, a collective of artists who inhabited a former factory in the inner city of Johannesburg called August House also disbanded when their building was finally sold in May 2015. I've been tracking this drawn-out process for about 18 months prior, since the owners put it up for sale in a bid to capture something about the remarkable yet understated life inside the place before it ended. So it wasn't only about that. In order to really get to grips with the kind of story we've just seen, which is basically how an artwork could become a powerful vector of the unfinished business of the past, we'd really need to get under the skin of artistic practice and process more generally. How can artwork do this in the first place? So to get back to first principles, as it were, onto the workshop floor, basically into what we see around us. I was really after what I came to call artistic thinking, but what others have termed visual knowing, Sullivan, or visual thinking, Arnheim, artist sensibility, Andrew, and even artist critique, Chiapello. To quote the latter, it embodies a discussion as to the value of things and stands opposed to the commodification of other forms of values, which money will never be able to take into account. What was august about August House was artistic thinking, and I found in this research at least that it amounted to some key principles of collectivity, manifested in what Cruz calls nested capacity to reinvent the future. So at a very practical level, to follow this line of inquiry, I decided to track one artist on each floor of the building as they set about making a new thing. Okay, a thing in the broad sense of the term. That thing, of course, could be ephemeral or a new collaboration. So my key approach, since we're talking about research methods here, which I've now employed on a number of projects and has qualified me as basically as a stalker supreme, is Apatura's notion to follow the thing. It's a bit trickier than it sounds, especially when it comes to artworks, because they're very peculiar things and stubborn and often don't play along and fail and take left turns and do backflips and so on. But it's great fun, and it's also worked very well for the kind of work that I do, which is essentially arts-based research. I'm going to give you a one-liner definition, otherwise I'll disappear down that rabbit hole and never come out again. I like Henk Borgdorf's definition of arts-based research, which is thinking in, through, and with art. In that kind of research, art practice is part of the pathway through which new insights come into being, and it also contributes new forms meaningful in the world of art. So by following the artworks and where they go, the narrative wake of the journey catch multiple stories of comings and goings, beginnings and endings, life and death cycles, of what artist Donna Kukama calls hosting and ghosting. Like the story of Jumbo, we finally get into the elephant, the quite famous leftover mascots of a chain of liquor stores in Johannesburg in the city. Clearly visible from the rooftop of August House, a couple of corners down, where it was perched on the building pediment, an impromptu plinth. Jumbo featured in a public art intervention called Nakuranza, which means I love you, part of a broader project called Art in Troubled Times, and comprised a series of happenings around the street corner, the same place where in 2004 a musician, Gito Baloy, had been shot dead. Nakuranza was the title of one of his albums. So bullet trajectories were chalked onto intersections. You have 30 seconds. Roses were handed out to passers-by. Baloy's portrait was painted by graffiti artist Breeze Yoko onto a wall below the elephant. You can see it in that other image. A street-side table, ostensibly selling goods, was set up, but with ritualistic objects instead. Script from the Truth Commission was read out between artists, and the elephant presided over everything, imagined as a mute witness to the murder. T-shirts with anti-xenophobic sentiments were screen printed and handed out. Foreigners, don't leave us with the tourists, they said. This referred to the fact that this area was part of a flashpoint of anti-foreigner violence meted out in 2008. The intervention was coordinated by Centre for Historical Reenactments, who are residents inside August House. Later, they took the same elephant with them to New York to appear at a museum show called After Tears, making reference to the term for a funeral wake. CHR committed institutional suicide and shut down shortly afterwards. The elephant returned to its position. But the next time I saw it, while the studio was nearing dissolution, its back was turned to August House, and the next time it was mysteriously gone, as you can see in the image alongside. Another cousin lives in Troyville nearby, where it also marks a liquor store, and I've spotted a third not far away standing with its feet on the ground. But the disappeared August House elephant fate remains a mystery. It features in that book as one of many micro-stories of life and death, suicides even, visibilities and invisibilities, comings and goings, that spiral up and around and whose resonances continue to reverberate. Somehow it seems these kind of memories that make up a living archive and whose reshuffling may constitute a new narrative. On the other side we see it lives on in the logo of CHR, which no longer exists. Just like Jumbo, the storyline of August House also has a surprising twist in the tale. I wrote it up as a triptych, focusing upon the studios first of all, then the artistic process, and then the afterlife of the artworks. It's not really a linear book. It hops around in time and space, and its design reflects that content. Its ultimate message can best be summed up by the story of Gordon Froud, the artist on the top floor. I follow a new series of cone virus works that he makes. Here they are in the August House basement, waiting to be transfigured into some kind of artwork. Here they are being installed on a cliff top as part of a public art festival. And here they are manifesting into his cone virus shape. It actually got vandalized on that public art festival and kind of disappeared in some public theft. It's quite interesting. So what's really particularly interesting about Gordon's fate, if you like, is that besides his artworks, which I track, is what he ends up doing in response to this great uncertainty of the building being sold, is that he moves to a new site. He buys his studio space this time around instead of renting, and then he also buys the space next door and he turns it to collective ends. And one of the things he ends up doing is starting a new gallery called the Stokvel Gallery. And a Stokvel is a South African term for a collaborative economy. So people sometimes use it, for example, for funeral insurance or for anything whereby you collectively pool your resources and then you rotate the benefits. So in the gallery, for instance, the artists will all contribute to membership, and then it'll be your turn to host an exhibition. Then it'll be the next artist's turn, and so on. And those kinds of collaborative, collective solutions work on a kind of fractal principle, and you find that in lots of African cities they get called different things. But when people don't have access to formal, systemic solutions, they often self-invent these kinds of networks. Collaborative economies have their risks, but you know, where people have to fill the gaps themselves, you often do find these kinds of solutions in what Abdulmalik Simone has called people as infrastructure, extending the notion of infrastructure to people's activity in the city. He points out that African cities are characterized by incessantly flexible, mobile and provisional intersections of residents that operate without clearly delineated notions of how the city is to be inhabited and used. These intersections, he says, have depended on the ability of residents to engage complex combinations of objects, spaces, persons, and practices. The junctions, he writes, become an infrastructure, a platform providing for and reproducing life in the city. This is our segue into the final part of the talk, which visits independent art spaces in other African cities in a project called Platform. We'll end with a living human being hoisted onto someone's shoulders to replace our voided bronze statue. So Platform is a project I'm running with African Centre for Cities at UCT, which this year visits 5 independent art spaces in selected African cities to find out how they operate, what sort of art forms they help manifest, and how these relate to the urban fabric. The idea is that these kind of alternative spaces could indicate future forms and ways of doing that other practitioners and institutions might find helpful. So just a caveat, it's still early days and I'm only halfway through the field work, so these thoughts are provisional and not yet really at the point of findings, But the spaces are all also in very different cities, and I don't intend to compare them. I'm using quite dissimilar examples, and I'm going to quote from Teresa Coliero's idea of juxtaposing to bring out some interesting characteristics in each. So I'll end this talk by sharing 3 key principles from this work in progress. So in Nairobi, I visited the Go Down Art Centre, which is a non-profit that acts as a kind of art hub with subsidized studios, workspaces, gallery, and performance space. Oddly enough, it's on a similar cusp to August House because it's currently about to upgrade into Kenya's first post-independence major cultural build. It's actually doing this in collaboration with a Swedish architectural firm called White. And so people are all going to have to relocate temporarily while that happens. I went to overlap with the Nani Hoop Festival. Nani Hoop means who is Nairobi. It's basically a festival that engages several neighborhoods, where week by week each neighborhood curates their own events to kind of explore this notion of identity, who are we? That festival and the cultural rebuild are actually related because the Go Down sees itself as engaging in urban space and being a kind of a node for where it's situated in the city, which is an industrial area. And in order to participate at that level, they really want to know the issues of who are we and how do we, what is our claim to the city became relevant. So the festival is a way of working that out and then letting that help infuse this new build. So the neighborhoods culminate in a kind of inter-neighborhood games and so on. Excuse me. The central activity for each neighborhood was a guided walk, where you get taken around to key nodes in the locality. For instance, my first day I went to Kibera, the biggest squatter or slum area, and saw the oldest homestead, an educational charity focused on girl children, and an art gallery, as well as surprises like passing by a makeshift outdoor cinema. The main point I drew from the walks was the horizontality, which is the first key principle I want to share. There's no curator or head figure giving instructions. As Joy Mboya, who directs the Go Down, put it, what you do is you give a platform. When we started, we tried to be invisible. What you do is you give a platform. The community takes on the programming and decides what that should comprise. Some key moments for me in that walk were standing in the gallery shack kiosk that was crammed full of paintings and having one of our guides talk about the importance of acting locally but thinking globally. She was referring to graffiti artist Zola 7, whose work I had just caught sight of. He's best known for his Peace Wanted Alive signage around Kibera that he instigated after post-election violence. And in the very next moment, seeing this local global principle in action by walking out the gallery door to find this motorbike taxi, locally called Border Border, with a football field for a seat. This was very strategically at the time of the climax games of the World Cup. And later that evening, while watching one of those games at a public venue, learning that these self-same bikers navigate their city and get their clients by using Taxify app on their smartphones. Even roadside sellers use cashless systems. Just the name, Border Border, which is spelled B-O-D-A, connotes something too. It's a play on border, border. They literally crisscross boundaries. The idea of making your own way, of cutting your own path, of carving your own road through life is very prevalent. The border borders do not stick to the roads. They also drive on the pavements. Walking home, I would have to stop left when I heard a hoot. They go in either direction down the roads, and they carry signage that's really funny. They're trickster characters that make their own rules. This is a sign from outside an artist studio at the Go Down Centre, making fun of the civil disobedience openly on display. So number 4, Panya routes are border crossing routes often used by smugglers, but also as an expression to refer to an informal route used to get around an official route. It's the back route or the hacked routes. And you see this a lot in these kind of cities, the roots in the grass that people make for themselves. And that's also what I mean by horizontality, the hacker's pathway. This signboard brings us to the second key principle that visit triggered for me, a philosophy of second chance, of coming around again, of repair and recovery, whether giving a person a second chance, who then goes on to start a world-renowned charity in the country's biggest slum area, or giving clothes a second chance, selling them at market, or creating a metal kist at the famous metal workshop called Kali, which means hot sun, or creating artworks out of bits of metal scrap from cauldron cans, like Dickens' Otieno does. There he is in his Go Down studio. I'm finding in these places that contemporary art's not only reserved for something newly made, that's pinned to the wall or on a plinth, although it may very well be, but rather that it takes its life force from the materiality of everyday practices and amplifies their logics. I have to reflect reality, is how another Go-Down artist, Tom Mboya, put it, as he showed me his latest painting of an immigrant towing a suitcase standing in front of a barred entrance. The second principle is connected to the Panya routes we just heard about. Some of the most intriguing art that I discover on these trips is down Panya routes. When I'm at the neighborhood games, for instance, I wander off into the wilder part of the park and discover this fantastic mural by Eric Manier that is produced collectively with a compelling story about a sacred stone at its middle. Here he's standing in his artwork, and later, when I walk down an Accra street, I discover by chance a subversive mural by Nico Ware that celebrates a radical journalist called Anas, who exposes corruption and masks his identity with a beaded headdress. It's these kinds of backroads that the research also has to weave into its own design. This is life going on in front of his extended part of his mural. Which brings us to Ghana, the ANO Institute of Art and Knowledge, like the Go-Down, also has its home in a former car warehouse and has just expanded its lodgings across the road. In between is positioned this mobile museum designed by architect Latifa Idris, the result of a kiosk culture projects. A kiosk is a small and ubiquitous trading hut on which the collapsible museum design is based. It symbolically represents a current project ANO is undertaking, travelling the 10 regions of Ghana and asking everyone it meets what culture means to them and what they'd like to see in a museum. You can see the resonance already with Naini Hood in its deferral and its horizontality and open access structure. I also found great resonance with the idea of mobility, which is my third and final principle, which you see manifested everywhere. The stool that lady is carrying becomes a table when she makes a mobile sale. The project called Future Museum is asking Kenti sellers, weavers, farmers, artists, creators, performers, workers, and traditional priests what art means to them. And the answers range from ritual to indigenous knowledge to the intangible ways that things are customarily done. I was there to watch this project get manifested into an exhibition called Future Museum. Where these principles are leading to, I'll share a little anecdote that will explain. We're sitting in the lounge of ANO and we're discussing the curatorial principles of Nana, a Fariata Ayim, who founded and runs the space, with a visiting delegation of curators actually from Norway. The opening of the Future Museum has been deferred, and she's busy telling us why. As it happens, I actually leave the city without that exhibition opening. The future always seems to be in constant deferral in that city, being in the making. Later, I actually come to see that with a bit of delight, and this incident informs it. While we're having this discussion, there's an enormous crackjack of an explosion, like really, really loud, and repeats itself 2, 3, 4 times. And we all just, what's going on? And we rush to the balcony to see what's happening. There's this enormous sort of riotous noise outside. We look over the balcony and the street is full of people, and there's 2 men on a crowd's shoulders with their face painted white. They come past the window, saying, "Hello, what's going on here?" And she says, "Oh, it's 2 chiefs, local chiefs are being installed." So the installation of the exhibition has been halted because she wants resonance from everyday life, and she's saying we really need to find a way to get this resonance. I'll read a quote just now about how she exactly expressed that. And the irony of this kind of like stymied installation of the exhibition and the installation of actual chiefs coming past our door at that moment was just incredible. And really, demonstrated a point in this performative way, which I thought was really compelling. She had just said, I don't want Anna to become a kind of hipster space. She said, it comes back to what context do we stem from? What resonance do we get from everyday life and engage with that? We need to reimagine what we are as a nation, a collective identity, seeing what is already there, visually and aesthetically, and rethinking Ghana as a metaphor. And as she said that, this procession came down the street. So really just, this brings me to the creation of social reality through performative intervention. And I mean that in the sense of Austin's kind of linguistic understanding of performative, such as promises or bets, that if produced in the right circumstances, create the conditions of their own truth. Austin's performatives don't only describe, but co-institute a reality. They don't merely say something, but they also do something. The conclusion: creating the conditions of your own truth is necessary when you work in contexts where basic infrastructures fail. So this is a picture of the former FCA Institute in Ghana. It's an independent art space that was wiped out by a collapsed tree during severe floods. 3 years later, it's still waiting for funding to help resuscitate itself. The security guard who's looking after this space tells me, if you run these spaces, you're on your own. Its fate is representative of a severe set of realities under which these spaces operate, which often translates in my research into what I'll term opacity. An opacity out of necessity. There are not enough resources, capital, or hands on the wheel, so forward planning and shared capacities too thinly spread, and there's not much visibility. Opacity also as a survival strategy, and because it's exhausting to keep explaining oneself. It's also a canny form of refusal when needed, and opacity sometimes simply because there was no power for 5 weeks, so emails can't be answered. These are the realities on the ground, which are in a different order. And they also relate to material conditions. This plot is not for sale, beware of conmen. You kind of see these contested claims to territory everywhere. Nonetheless, these spaces are busy building infrastructures to create a context. You have to have courage, says Nico Ware, about this design, with a man sitting on a lion's head, which he later puts inside the lion's mouth. This is a mural for the Shaliwati Public Arts Festival, being helped found in Accra. These spaces are doing it incrementally in a process that urbanist Teresa Caldera terms auto-construction, following the Latin American term for it, little by little, always in the making. It's about building a future using the logics of the city fabric. As this image shows, a building in Accra with multiple stages of completion, also serving multiple purposes. This is a kindergarten by day and a church by night, behind that purple curtain. I see auto-construction myself when I visit places in Cape Town, like the post-apartheid township of Dunoon, where if you visit on any given day, you'll see houses like this. A government-issued brown matchbox house inside, sitting inside a much more ambitious sheath of a new house growing over it, as the owner takes what the state has given, but completely hacks it to their own ends by making incremental self-improvements over time, while life goes on inside. So it's good to pay attention to these new forms, these new visible sheets of aspiration, often collectively and incrementally built. This house will be built on weekends and evenings over a long period of time, with a lot of people helping. Caldera calls this process of urbanization in the global south peripheral urbanization, not because of its physical location, it happens anywhere. It's peripheral because of the crucial role of residents in producing space, which she says unfolds transversely in relationship to official logics. That is what makes it peripheral. People are always in complicated sets of relationships they must constantly work out and perform anew. It's a rhizomatic logic that is subversive and pragmatic at the same time, balancing official and unofficial relations in hybrids. I'll leave you with an image of the Sankofa bird, a Ghanaian symbol. It's a bird with its feet facing forward and its head facing backwards, in the future and in the past. It's this act of doubling that I think somehow encapsulates the challenge of the empty plinth that we started with, and the challenge we all have to figure out as we move forward with efforts to reimagine and recalibrate the public sphere. How to hold the past and the present together with all their contradictions and messiness, and fathom a common space. In the words of Michael Gimmer of Anno Institute, while he was painting plinths to hold videos for the Future Museum, he said, "It looks like a home calling when you see the future. You collect the aspects you lost, like how we used to drink tea with pineapple and ginger. It used to be a part of us, but got lost on the way." Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Kim. Do we have a couple of questions from the audience? Please feel free. I can send this around. Okay, I'll start then by asking Kim. I'm curious in terms of how you would describe your research method, if you could say something about that. And also in how you see that relating to, I mean, you're such a shapeshifter, is a word that you use yourself. You take on so many different roles, so I wonder how research comes into that?
Sure. Yes, shapeshifting. So I do different things. I am a practitioner, a very slow producer of artworks. I think it's important for me personally to have a foot in that world because I appreciate how it is to be a producer. And I work things out. I have a studio practice and that's how I work. And I work certain things out there that inform my other work. And my art practice and research and writing kind of cross-pollinate in terms of the conceptual ideas. However, there's certain things that I do keep distinct. I think the ethics of different kinds of work that I do are a little bit different. So I think it's important to hold on to context. So for instance, if I approach people and enroll them into a project on a certain basis, I'll always keep a sense of that because it's important not to confuse, if you've enrolled people in a certain way, it's important not to lose sight of that because you have a responsibility to, on the ethics of those things. But I do think intellectually, conceptually, those different things definitely cross-pollinate. So for me, that's just how I work, and because the nature of the work is quite interdisciplinary, that I find that helpful, that interweaving, I find it helpful. The research method, art-based research, I find art practice or artistic principles generative and helpful way to lead the research. So I think it's that artistic principles infuse the kind of research that I do. It runs in an artistic way. It's often very tricky because the outputs also need to manifest in a way that respects the content. So the form that you give the output needs to take its cue from the content. So that's the trickiness of it. And I think just one clarification, when I say it's artwork led, you follow the artwork, it's not quite object led because it's a fusion of human and non-human. So it's a device. You follow the artwork, but in following that trail, it catches all sorts of other things in its wake. And I just find that that's a very helpful device to pick up all sorts of other things in the research wake.
You have a background in journalism, and I'm also thinking in the kind of temporality of writing for media or journalism as opposed to research, which supposedly is a longer process. So, and I think so much of your work is sort of you have this enormously keen eye for the practice of others, which I think is very unusual, and sort of that prolonged studies of following passages of people and skills and materials and so on. So do you think that way of working has been informed by journalism in a way? And if you could just comment, has it been useful for you? Has it been helpful, or do you rather sort of enjoy having the ability to conduct those longer studies within the research framework?
Yeah, it's a difficult one to answer. Definitely the temporality is completely different. So with journalism, you know, it's a daily output, and it's just like a continual production line, which I think I got very frustrated with those limits. So I think that's partly why that's behind me. And there's, you know, but I think it does give you a certain kind of discipline and a certain kind of set of writing skills and researching skills, which I definitely use. I also use it in very difficult circumstances where you need to have a slightly different toolbox. Maybe you reach a block and you need to be inventive about a way around. And I found those kind of tools useful in situations where you need to find a way around a gatekeeper or something like that. So it has been useful for that. And time management and those kinds of things. And journalism is a very pressurized environment, so it's helpful for those kinds of skills, but it's a very different kind of ethics and way of being, so those don't really apply. And I shifted my kind of writing to much longer form narrative, and I think research lends itself to that. These are long storylines with long tails, and I much more enjoy that kind of work where you can really immerse yourself in it and tell a very different kind of story. Engage yourself completely differently, and the output's got a different intention, and so I kind of swapped into that world instead.
Questions? Did everybody pick up all the details of all these very, very complex contexts that you're working in all the time? Yeah.
Full safari there.
Well, Kim's going to be around for a while, so there'll be more opportunities to ask.
Thank you so much, Catharina and Kim, for this interesting